Hi there. So I said today I'd talk about something dominating the news through the lens of Lila. And this is in fact addressed by Pirsig and Lila. And that thing that we're talking about today is socialism. So I'm not prepared to really give a primer on the metaphysics of quality, but there's a couple of concepts I have to talk about in order to understand this video. I've put a link to the Wikipedia page of the metaphysics of quality, which gives an overview that's easy to understand. So according to the metaphysics of quality, there are 4 levels of static patterns, and they increase in evolutionary advancement. The first static pattern is inorganic patterns. These are non-living things. The second level is biological patterns. These are living things. The third level is social patterns, which are behaviors, habits, rituals, and institutions. And the fourth level is intellectual patterns, which is ideas. Then there's dynamic quality, which is always around, which is what is good, drawing things to it. And by doing so, it shakes these patterns up and reorients them to drive toward what's better. This is like the metaphor of the sailboat in my last video by the Reverend Cynthia Bourgeot. You have elements that are engaged with a third element that changes the relationship within the static pattern so it goes forward. So in this next section, I'm going to use a lot of quotes. So bear with me. This is in chapter 17 of Lila. And they call it freedom. That's not right. Freedom doesn't mean anything. Freedom's just an escape from something negative. The real reason it's so hallowed is that when people talk about it, they mean dynamic quality. That's what neither the socialists nor the capitalists ever got figured out. From a static point of view, socialism is more moral than capitalism. It's a higher form of evolution. It's an intellectually guided society, not just a society that's guided by mindless traditions. That's what gives socialism its drive. But what the socialists left out, and what has all but killed their whole undertaking, is an absence of a concept of indefinite dynamic quality. You go to any socialist city and it's always a dull place because there's little dynamic quality. On the other hand, the conservatives who keep trumpeting about the virtues of free enterprise are normally just supporting their own self-interest. They are just doing the usual cover-up for the rich in their age-old exploitation of the poor. Some of them seem to sense there is also something mysteriously virtuous in a free enterprise system. And you can see them struggling to put it into words, but they don't have the metaphysical vocabulary for it any more than the socialists do. The metaphysics of quality provides the vocabulary. A free market is a dynamic institution. What people buy and what people sell, in other words, what people value, can never be contained by any intellectual formula. What makes the marketplace work is dynamic quality. The market is always changing, and the direction of that change can never be predetermined. The metaphysics of quality says the free market makes everybody richer by preventing static economic patterns from setting in and stagnating economic growth. That is the reason the major capitalist economies of the world have done much better since World War II than the major socialist economies. It is not that Victorian social economic patterns are more moral than socialist intellectual economic patterns. Quite the opposite. They are less moral as static patterns go. What makes the free enterprise system superior is that the socialists, reasoning intelligently and objectively, have inadvertently closed the door to dynamic quality in the buying and selling of things. They closed it because the metaphysical structure of their objectivity never told them dynamic quality exists. So Phaedrus observed that socialism is superior morally because it's in the intellectual realm, but the trouble with socialism is that it does not include dynamic quality. So ultimately, it can't function. And because this is a system that's devised intellectually through rationality, things like dynamic quality don't exist. In fact, the socialist system thinks that it's better because it misinterprets the fact that something needs updating for it being completely bad, and it needs to get rid of all of that stuff, all of that. And within that is intangibles like superstition, religion, etc. So socialist systems stagnate without this dynamic quality, and to think of socialism over the 20th century is a perfect example of how stagnation, something that should have had dynamism but doesn't, becomes ultimately evil. Now I'm going to mention Ken Wilber, so you might already know about his integral theory, and if not, there's a link to his website underneath in the description. But real quick, Wilber says that human consciousness evolves, and he's depicted this evolution in levels, and he color codes the levels. So now we've achieved green, and so let me show you this graphic so you can take a look at that for a minute, and then I'll proceed. So what Friedrich is saying about the problem of socialism seems to be almost exactly what Ken Wilber says about the green level. Green is woke, which in itself is great because our human consciousness has finally awakened to the reality that all human beings are of equal merit. The problem is that green rejects all the levels below it. It says it has this intellectual arrogance that says, well, we finally have discovered the truth, and it's a powerful truth that everyone is equal. But that means that the Greens perceives themselves as perfect and not needing anything from the past. In fact, they should get rid of everything from the past, the same way socialism does. So Green, and let's just call them the left or the postmodernists, reject previous conservative values completely, and in so doing cut themselves off from the dynamism that the updating of old values can provide. And this is exactly the problem we're having in our political environment, and why, in terms of socialism, there's very pro-socialist camps, almost communist these days, and very anti-socialist camps that reject anything that has any reference to socialism whatsoever, and even if some of that is good. So what would Friedrich recommend? Well, in this paragraph, he's using the success of New York City to describe what needs to be done. People, like everything else, work better in parallel than they do in a series. This is what happens to this free enterprise city, New York, when things are organized socialistically in a bureaucratic series. Any increase in complexity increases the probability of failure. You see this happening in intersectionality and identity politics. But when they're organized in a free enterprise parallel, an increase in complexity becomes an increase in diversity more capable of responding to dynamic quality, and thus an increase of the probability of success. It's this diversity and parallelism that makes the city work. This too seems like what Ken Wilber would recommend in order to integrate the superior morality of Green in terms of it being an intellectual, in terms of it being the inclusiveness of all people. You have to respect where this came from. You have to respect the older values based on collective emotional systems, collective emotional responses over time. And here's a quote by Pirsig. What people value can never be contained by any intellectual formula. So to integrate the good parts of this new awareness of socialism, potentially such as healthcare, some education benefits, definitely the idea that everyone is of equal value, into the capitalist system, you need something like mutual respect and collaboration. It's not all or nothing like the pundits keep insisting. But the problem is it's not happening. And there doesn't seem to be a way to make it happen, and there's a total impasse. So what are we going to do? Well, maybe now all we've got is ourselves. So there's a quote in Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance that I love. The future is going to be changed by individuals making quality decisions, and that's all. And then after that quote, he goes on to say, God, I don't want to have any more enthusiasm for big programs full of social planning for big masses of people that leave individual quality out. So it seems like all we can do is change ourselves right now to do our best to live a quality existence, and hope it catches on. So I hope that made sense, and I'll see you next time.